Can you believe it, folks? The 4 at a time Flying Geese video is finally here. Thanks for your patience while I got this together. To use the 4 at a time Flying Geese method, as you would have seen from my previous videos, you need 1 large square and 4 smaller squares. But what size squares do you need for which size Flying Geese? As you'll see in this little image here, I have a small chart ranging from 1/2 by 1 to a 4 by 8 Flying Geese. So the large square, which forms the body of the Flying Geese unit, so the large rectangle when you're looking at it, needs to be cut at 1 3/4 inch larger than the finished length of your Flying Geese unit, and the 4 small squares need to be cut at 1 1/4 inch larger than the finished height. So in my example here, for a 6 by 3 finished or a 6.5 by 3.5 unfinished, 1 large square needs to be 7 3/4 inches, which is the 6-inch finished size plus the 1 3/4 inch, and the 4 small squares need to be 4 1/4 inches, which is the finished size of 3 plus that 1 1/4 inch. Now that we have our pieces, let's get into construction. Let's sew. Okay, so before I went through what you need to cut to make the 4 at a time Flying Geese with room to trim down. So what you'll see in front of you here is I am going to be making 2 sets of 4, because with this video you're going to get a bonus pattern of a Dutchman's puzzle block. So the first thing we need to do after establishing the size that we need to cut them to is draw a diagonal line on the back of each of the 4 smaller squares for each set of 4 Flying Geese. With all of our lines drawn now, we can grab over one of our large squares, and I like to place it at the 45-degree angle in front of me. We'll start by placing one of our smaller squares with the diagonal line pointing towards the corner, making sure that we line up our edges as close as possible. I like to just keep this with a pin because, as you can see, with the 7 3/4 inch large square, it's a big surface to trust that it's going to stay in place while taking it over to the sewing machine. We then put a second one on the top corner here, and we make sure as much as possible that our diagonal line is going straight. If it doesn't quite match up, you can just fudge it when you're sewing, but 9 times out of 10 it will match up perfectly. Once again, I'm just going to secure this. Now, what we need to do is take this to the machine and sew 1/4 inch on each side of our drawn line. I'll get the other one ready, do the sewing, and come back. With our 1/4 inch sewn on either side of the line, we now have to cut the block in half on our drawn line. Honour is close to, the seam allowance is already made, so it's fine if you are not exact. We then need to press these and we will just press these up . Use a clapper if you have one, just to pull the heat out of that fabric before moving it. I do like to finger press the seam first, just to make sure that it is going to remain straight, because on that edge now we are working with a little bit of bias. We then take the last 2 remaining squares and place them on our love heart, pointing towards the last corner here and up towards the peak, Again, I'm just going to secure that with a couple of pins. We will once again sew 1/4 inch on each side of this line. Those are now sewn. As you can see, we once again get our rotary blade and ruler and cut along our drawn line. And once again, press our pieces out. We now need to trim down our flying geese, and this can be done with either the Ultimate Flying Geese tool from Creative Grids or a standard quilting ruler. I will show you both ways here, but my preferred method is to use the Ultimate Flying Geese tool. It's just a little bit simpler. So we started with a 7 3/4 inch large square to make sure that we would have a finished size of 3 by 6 or an unfinished size of 3.5 by 6.5. We look at our ruler here, and there is a little chart which tells us which reference line we need to use and also our cutting sizes on the Ultimate Flying Geese tool. So we're looking for line F, which is this solid white line here. You line that up in the peak of your Flying Geese unit as best you can. Trim your two sides. Rotate the block and the tool. Look for our solid white line again. Here we can line this up on the outside as well as our peak, and trim our remaining two sides. Perfect. I'll do that again using our reference line on the tool for our size. Line that up in the peak. Trim the first two sides. Sometimes you're not going to be trimming much. It depends how fine a 1/4 inch seam you did, how perfect your pieces were cut, etc. But there should always be something to trim off. Rotate the block and the tool. Line those markings up once again and trim the final two sides. Okay, let's look now with a standard quilting ruler. This is easy to do. Grab your piece. You will note that the base of the Flying Geese unit is still one of your originally cut edges when you cut your large square, so you know that that is straight. You also know that your finished width is going to be 6.5, so we know that the middle is 3.25. We then also need to make sure that we have 1/4 inch above the peak of our Flying Geese unit to allow for our seam allowance. So on our ruler here, we need to match up the 3.25 inch mark, ensuring we have 1/4 inch above our peak, and that this has got a reference to be a straight line. So this works out well. I can put it on the line straight there. Oh. So I know that this is straight because that is running parallel. I have my 3.25 inch mark
and I know that we've got our 1/4 inch above that line. Once again, you trim your 2 sides. Rotate the block, and now that we know that this is at a 90-degree angle, we just get our 6.5 and our 3.5 inch line lined up there. And because I am using a 6.5 inch tool, my diagonal is also going right along that arm of the Flying Geese. And that is how you trim with a standard ruler. I will do that once again without all the explanation. And there you have your Flying Geese, 4 at a time, perfectly sized. I'll get on and make the other light blue ones now and come back and show you the construction of our Dutchman's puzzle block. Okay, with our 2 lots of 4 at a time Flying Geese made, it's time for the bonus block. For this, we just need to sew these in pairs, either this way or that way, it doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to put them this way. I'm going to join these together here. And sew a 1/4 inch down this side, and when I get close to this point here, I'm going to pay attention to where my needle is, and I'm going to make sure that it's just to the right of the threads that are crossed over there, and that'll ensure I do not lose that point.
A few moments later.
With those all sewn now, we just need to press, and you will have a struggle with the opposing seam allowances. So if you've seen any of my videos, you know that I clip into the seam allowance but not past the stitching. This allows me to have the seam allowance on top of the peak go up and on the sides go down. There's less bulk, not no bulk, and that is bad English. This gives you less bulk across this seam, especially here, and as you can see, because I paid attention to where my threads were going on that cross, I have not lost the point on the bottom Flying Geese unit. Give that a press. That is one. Just again, I clip into the seam allowance down to, but not through the stitching on either side of our bulky peak. I make sure that the peak goes up and our side parts come down. This gives me the flattest block possible. I'm just off on that peak, but I didn't lose it, so I'm not too worried. Again, how it looks at the back after being pressed. Okay, to create our Dutchman's puzzle block, we're going to make a pinwheel out of our light blue ones in the center. Try and get that all in. Woo. Sorry for the seasickness, folks. Like that. And then sew in a 4-patch fashion. I've got one more trick for you, so wait until I come back.
A few moments later.
After sewing the initial 2 seams, we need to press this opposing. So once again, what I like to do is cut either side of this one. And I can press the bulk. The clipping wasn't necessary, we just have to make sure that the center, these two here, are in opposing directions. Nestle that nice and tight. Put a pin. To hold that snug. So our 1/4 inch.
A few moments later.
Now, in the center here, we have 8 pieces of fabric all coming together. We made sure that we got these on opposing sides. So what I'm going to do to get the flattest center possible is swirl the seams in the middle here. So as I've done before and I have showed you, we just undo the little stitches that are above our stitching line. Give that a twist and that opens that up. Press all of the seams in the same direction. In this case, it's a clockwise direction. And you will actually get a miniature pinwheel in the middle here. What I like to do is just give that a press first with the tip of my iron. Get that flat, rotate the block, and then finish pressing on the front. I didn't quite get my center perfect, but I'm not too worried about that. And just to show you again on the back, we get our little pinwheel here. All of our seam allowances are out, so it's not bulky. Everything is pressed in the one direction, and you have a bonus Dutchman's puzzle block. Thanks for watching.